They called her a fugitive, but when Elias opened the door, he saw she carried a secret that could burn the whole town to the ground. And from that moment on, there was no turning back. The storm howled through the valley, slamming against the cabin walls as if it meant to tear the place apart. The night sky churned, thunder splitting the rain into blinding sheets of light, then sinking again into heavy darkness. Elias Ward sat alone by the fire, the hiss of wind through the cracks mixing with the soft crackle of burning wood. Then came the knocking no, pounding hard and frantic. Elias rose, his hand tightening around the Winchester leaning by the table. When the door flew open, a figure stumbled inside. An Apache woman, her long hair plastered wet to her face, black eyes burning with defiance. Her dress clung to her frame, torn and filthy from the road. Her left shoulder was bleeding, red drops mixing with the rain and pooling on the wooden floor. She looked up at Elias, breath ragged, her voice hoarse from cold and fear. "Please, let me stay the night. If you'd been 1 minute later, I'd have died out there." From far beyond the storm, through wind and rain, Elias caught the faint rhythm of hoofbeats, steady, cold, like a war drum. A flicker of torchlight flashed in the darkness, then vanished. Elias looked at the woman, then at the storm. He knew if he shut that door now, there'd be no going back. But he also knew if he left her standing there another minute, she wouldn't live to see the morning. Elias shoved the door shut and dropped the heavy bar into place. The wind outside screamed in protest, rattling against the cabin walls. But inside, the firelight cast their shadows tall and flickering across the gray plank walls. He set the Winchester on the table, pulled a chair closer to the hearth, and motioned for her to sit. She said nothing, only let her eyes roam the room with a wary sweep, as if every dark corner might be hiding an enemy. Elias fetched an old woolen scarf and wrapped it around her shoulders. Rainwater dripped from her buckskin dress, leaving a trail across the floor. From a drawer, he took out a bottle of whiskey and a clean scrap of cloth. When his hand touched the wound at her shoulder, she drew in a sharp breath but didn't pull away. "You're not going to ask my name?" her voice rasped. Without looking up, Elias said, "If you want me to know it, you'll tell me." She narrowed her eyes, the faintest curl of a smile tugging at her lips, part gratitude, part testing him. "Nahila," she said at last, and fell silent again. The cabin sat more than 3 miles from Dry Creek, its back pressed to a line of gray hills, the front facing open flats where the wind rolled dust like waves this time of year. Elias Ward had lived here over a decade alone, with a few dozen head of cattle and 1 old black horse. The townsfolk knew little about him, only that he'd once worn the cavalry's blue and survived a bloody ambush, then walked away from the army without a word. He kept no friends, went to no dances, took part in no one's business, and no one much cared to tangle with him. Nahila didn't explain how she came to be wounded, or why she'd shown up at his door in the middle of a storm. But her eyes, that deep, steady black, reminded Elias of others who'd survived things no one dared speak of. Outside, the hoofbeats came again, closer now. Nahila flinched, her hand gripping the chair's edge. Elias glanced toward the window, catching the glow of a torch moving through the rain, then vanishing into the dark. "Who'd you bring to my door?" he asked, voice low, a note of steel in it. Nahila hesitated, then said, "I didn't bring them. They're hunting me. They want me dead." Elias poured another splash of whiskey and set the glass in front of Nahila. She lifted it, taking a small sip, not to drink herself numb, but just enough to draw a little heat into her chest. Her hand trembled faintly, but her eyes never left the door. On the table, beside the glass, sat the small leather pouch she'd carried in. It was soaked through, its drawstring slack. When Nahila bent to tighten the knot, something metal slid free, dropped to the floor, and struck with a sharp, dry clink. Elias stooped to pick it up and froze. It was a cavalry officer's badge, brass, its edges scuffed, an eagle stamped in the center, the kind only issued to a commanding officer. He'd once worn one himself until the night everything turned to hell. "Where did you get this?" Elias's voice was low, deliberate, heavy as stone. Nahila studied him for a long moment, weighing whether to speak. Then, in a single measured breath, she said, "From a man who sold out his own." The fire seemed to dim with those words. Elias turned away, but the memories came all the same. Gunsmoke, the shouts of dying men, and the eyes of the comrade he'd trusted like a brother, before the man vanished into the dark alongside the enemy. The wind outside rose to a howl, rain lashing the roof like it meant to tear it away. Nahila's voice stayed calm, but her gaze was sharp as a knife. That man is now the mayor of Dry Creek. Elias closed his fist around the badge, the cold bite of the metal sinking into his palm. He'd stayed clear of that town for years, just to keep from facing the past. But now, that past sat in his kitchen in the form of a wounded Apache woman with a pack of wolves on her trail. The hoofbeats came again so close now he could hear the jingle of bridle chains. A glow of torchlight swept across the curtain. Nahila locked eyes with him. "You help me, and I'll give you the truth you've been chasing for 10 years. But if you open that door, you'll never turn back." Elias said nothing. He only stood, reached for the Winchester, and blew out the lamp. In the dark, he could hear every beat of his heart, and the sound of a horse stopping just beyond the fence. The hoofbeats stopped. Only the rain on the roof and the wind through the cracks remained. Elias leaned toward the curtain and peered out. 3 riders stood motionless in the downpour, cloaks plastered to their shoulders, each holding a burning torch. The firelight threw harsh lines across faces too hard to tell if they belonged to bordermen or hired killers. The leader urged his horse a few paces closer, his eyes sweeping the cabin like a wolf scenting prey. He stopped at the fence and called out, voice gravelly, "Ward, we know she's in there. Hand her over, and you'll be left in peace." Nahila shrank back, her hand moving by instinct to the dagger strapped to her thigh. Elias stepped away from the window and murmured, "They know my name." He moved to the gun rack, checked the load on the Winchester. Nahila watched every motion, suspicion, and expectation both in her eyes. "If they take me," she said quietly, "you won't be left in peace either. I'm not the only thing they're hunting." Outside, another rider shouted, "The mayor wants to see you, both of you. Tonight." Elias turned to her slowly. "Both?" She gave a small nod, a glint of challenge in her gaze. "He's wanted you dead for a long time, but you stayed in the shadows, and he couldn't find the excuse." The leader's low chuckle drifted through the rain. He raised a hand, and from the darkness behind him, 4 more riders emerged, forming a half circle around the cabin. Torchlight blazed against the wet night, their shadows stretching high across the walls. Elias knew open that door, and he'd vanish like the dozens of men buried in the desert. Keep it shut, and he'd have to stand with Nahila against the whole town, or die beside her. A lightning bolt split the sky, laying bare the leader's face, and Elias knew him. The man had once worn the same uniform, had once stood at Elias's back on the night of the ambush 10 years ago, before disappearing alongside the traitor. The old anger flared hot under his skin. Elias rested the Winchester on the sill, his voice low to Nahila. "If you want to live, get ready. They won't knock twice." Outside, the hoofbeats began again slow, tightening the noose. "I'm grateful you're here. If this story has stirred the dust of old memories, afternoons painted red by the setting sun, hoofbeats echoing in your chest, then subscribe to my channel, so each day, we can sit together once more, and I'll tell you another tale of the Old West." Thunder shook the roof. Elias pressed the Winchester tight to his shoulder, eyes fixed on the slit of the door. Nahila slid down to the floor, pulling a dagger and an old pistol from inside her boot. The smell of gun oil and the damp smoke from the hearth hung heavy in the air. The leader raised his hand in signal. 3 torches went out at once, darkness swallowing the yard. Only the flash of lightning lit the moving shapes of horses, closing the ring tighter. A sharp creak sounded from the side of the house, an old step giving way under a boot. Elias spun and squeezed the trigger. The blast split the rain, followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting mud. Shouts rang out. "They're firing! Move in!" Shapes rushed in from both sides. Nahila pressed to the window, firing. Her bullet tore into a rider's shoulder, knocking him clean out of the saddle. His panicked horse bolted, smashing through the fence. Another man pushed in close, gun aimed at the crack in the door. Elias shifted aside. The shot punched through the wall, splintering wood across his cheek. He fired back. There was a scream of a horse, then silence. The rain seemed heavier, each drop stinging against skin. Hoofbeats circled the house. Commands barked between bursts of gunfire. Elias reloaded, but his eyes found Nahila. She was breathing hard, rain and sweat streaking down her cheeks, but her eyes still burned bright. She ducked low, speaking fast between shots. "The man who betrayed you, he's the one who sent them. I saw him take gold from the Mexicans that night. I saw him leave you and the others to die in that canyon. A bullet slammed into the doorframe above them, spraying wood chips. Elias clenched his jaw, the night of the ambush coming back sharp as if it were yesterday, blood, smoke, cries for help, and the shadow of his comrade vanishing with the enemy. Outside, the hoofbeats began to fade. The leader's voice called out, mocking, "Ward, tonight we let you be. But come morning, the mayor will be here himself." They rode off slow, leaving deep wheel ruts in the mud. The torchlight faded into the rain, but Elias knew this wasn't retreat. It was the step back before the killing stroke. Nahila slid the bolt into place and turned to him. "Now you see, don't you? If I die, the truth dies with me. But if they take me alive, you'll die too." Elias didn't answer. He quietly pulled more shells toward him, eyes fixed on the rain-black shape of the town in the distance. The rain didn't let up that night. Gust after gust slammed against the cabin walls as if to tear them apart. In the dim flicker of the fire, Elias sat cleaning his rifle, each movement slow, precise, as though measuring the weight of the choice before him. Nahila spread a torn map across the table. A smear of dried blood stained one corner a dark brown. Her finger traced a looping trail, leading away from the ranch. "If they come back at dawn," she said, "they'll come from this way. Out there, there's nothing to hide behind. You'll be caught in the open." Elias glanced at the map, then at her. "You want me to run?" She shook her head, her eyes lit with an iron steadiness. "I want us to go first. Tonight. To Dry Creek. If the truth about the mayor is spoken in the middle of the square, he won't have time to silence anyone." Elias gave a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You think they'll let us stroll into town? I used to live there. The second the name Ward is spoken, every eye will be on me, and every barrel too." Nahila didn't flinch. She reached into her leather pouch and pulled out a crumpled scrap of paper. 7 names were scrawled across it. Elias recognized 3 men who'd vanished after the ambush. They're alive, or at least, they were after that night. "I found them, one by one. And they all said the same thing. He sold us." The fire in Elias's eyes caught. For 10 years, he'd buried the past beneath the dust of the desert. Now the wind was stripping it bare, revealing the true face of a man he'd once called brother. He stood, taking the old leather coat from its peg by the door. "If we're going, we go now. Before the rain stops and the sun tells the whole town which road we're on." Nahila's smile was small, but it was the smile of someone who'd just won a dangerous bet. They doused the fire, slung rifles and ammunition over the saddles. The wind keened in their ears as 2 shadowed figures rode into the storm. Far ahead, lightning lit the spire of a church bell tower. Dry Creek was only a few hours' ride. Elias knew that when the sun rose, he'd either be standing in the square telling the truth, or lying buried in the ground he'd once called home. Dawn had only cut a thin slit of light across the sky when Dry Creek woke to an uneasy air. The main street bristled with guards, curious faces peeking from behind curtains. The hoofbeats of Elias and Nahila echoed down the street, drawing dozens of stares. By the time they reached the square, Mayor Rowan was already there, black cloak draped over his shoulders, the leader of last night's riders standing beside him. His smile never touched his eyes. It was the curl of a man who knew he held the knife. "Ward," Rowan's voice was deep, smooth. "I hear you've been sheltering a fugitive. Hand her over, and I'll forget about last night." Elias stayed in the saddle. He looked Rowan dead in the eye, then turned to the crowd. "Does anyone here remember the ambush at Black Hollow 10 years ago?" A ripple of whispers moved through the square. Rowan's brow tightened, but his tone stayed calm. "The dead of war should rest, Ward. Don't stir old graves." Nahila nudged her horse forward, her voice ringing clear enough for all to hear. "I was there. I saw him take gold from Mexican soldiers before he left his own men to die. I saw Elias Ward abandoned, while Rowan rode away with the enemy." The crowd broke into a buzz of voices. An old man leaning on a cane stepped forward. "Ward, is this true?" Elias answered by pulling the crumpled paper from his coat, the one Nahila had given him the night before. 7 names. Survivors from that night. 3 of them are here. Footsteps echoed from the edge of the square. 3 men emerged, older, faces lined and weathered, but their eyes steady. They nodded to Elias, then turned to point at Rowan in unison. "He sold us out." Rowan's face twitched. He raised a hand, and the guards leveled their rifles. The sound of bolts sliding home was like thunder. Elias swung down from the saddle, Winchester in hand. Anyone willing to die for a traitor pulled the trigger. The moment stretched, tight as a drawn bow. Then a shot cracked the air, not from the guards, but from a rooftop. One guard dropped. Chows erupted. Gunfire tore through the square, people shouting, scattering. Nahila rode up close, firing as she shouted. Behind the town hall, go. They plunged into the storm of lead, shoving through screams and the crush of bodies, leaving behind a square drowned in gunfire and a mayor screaming in rage as the truth bled into the open. The rain had stopped, but the smell of gunpowder still clung to the damp rooftops. From the edge of town, Elias looked back one last time. The square of Dry Creek was now only a distant blur, Rowan's shouts swallowed by distance and the pounding of hooves. Nahila rode beside him, the scarf from her head torn loose by the wind, letting her long black hair spill, still wet with rain. The early light slid across her cheek, catching the mud, the ash, and a look Elias had never seen on anyone before, a mixture of relief and resolve. So, have you paid your debt to the past? Nahila asked, her tone somewhere between mockery and genuine curiosity. Elias pulled gently on the reins, slowing his horse. Number. This debt has only just begun. They rode on, following the dirt road toward the hills. In the distance, thin black threads of smoke still rose from the square. A sign Dry Creek would not swallow the truth so easily. Nahila drew her cloak tighter, glancing at him. They'll hunt us. Rowan may lose his chair, but he still has men and they won't let you go. Elias gave a dry smile, his eyes far away. I've lived my whole life with death riding at my back. A few more chasing me won't make a difference. They pressed on, crossing a narrow valley where the wind carried the scent of wet grass and the murmur of a small stream. This road led to country. Elias knew well, a place no one could track a man unless he wished it. As the shadow of the mountains began to stretch across their path, Nahila asked suddenly, if one day I disappear, what will you do? Elias didn't turn. He kept his gaze ahead. I'll find you, even if it means crossing the desert or climbing the snowy peaks. Nahila stayed silent, though the corner of her mouth curled. Perhaps she believed him, or perhaps she only wanted to. Far ahead, a flock of crows burst from the sparse woods, startled by something unseen. Elias stopped his horse, his hand going instinctively to the rifle's stock. Nahila halted too, eyes sweeping the ridgeline. Nothing but the wind. But both of them knew, in this country, silence often meant another storm was on its way. Elias nudged his horse forward, his voice low but certain. Let's go. Our story isn't finished. They rode into the shadowed green at the foot of the mountains, two small figures fading from sight, leaving behind a divided town and a secret dragged into the light. Sometimes, to find yourself again, you have to step into the fire of truth, knowing it might burn away everything you once held. In the hard country of the West, justice isn't something that exists on its own. It survives only when someone's brave enough to bring it into the sun. Once again, I'm truly honored to have you here. Tell me what you felt in your heart as you heard this story. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Type an if you enjoyed it. And don't forget to subscribe, so you won't miss the next tale from the Wild West.